Order, order. Paul Maynard to move the motion. If everyone else could leave quietly, please.
Libraries in my constituency, it is hard to start without resorting to cliches, but of course cliches always serve a wider truth in my view. And so when I say that libraries change people's lives, they certainly do in my view. I remember my own involvement with my own local library, Weaver in Cheshire. It opened a whole new world to me. It may have been a small prefabricated building in a small village in the middle of Cheshire, but it was my gateway to a wider world. I looked up to the librarians who staffed it. They weren't just there to shelve books, to move books around. They were trained professionals. And in all the different options that we have to look at how libraries are provided, we should not overlook the fact that librarians are professionals. They are trained and they are talented. And it's not just a matter of moving books around. And libraries aren't just book repositories either. They're there for far more than that. As a friend of Thornton Cleveleys library wrote to me just the other day, he said, the nurseries in both areas utilise the provision, parents and their children. The young people use the library for their wargaming group, children's trailblazers groups, poetry meet, flower arranging, craft and chat, Shakespeare and literature workshops, Scrabble groups, IT clubs with support from a tech coach, knit and natter. The list is indeed endless. And it can go on, and that is just in two small libraries in Thornton and Cleveleys. And in the Minister's excellent white paper on the arts, the first proper one since the 1960s, he rightly emphasised that culture should be accessible to everybody, not just a matter of how much you can afford or where or how close you happen to live to the capital. It should be available for everybody. And that includes in coastal areas such as mine. So you can imagine my own intense personal frustration and the local anger that has been generated by Lancashire County Council's proposals to slash the number of libraries across the county to just 37, with a further 7 self-service locations. This is down from 73. And in particular, are 2 libraries close to my heart because they're in my patch. They are the library in Cleveleys, which has a very popular children's centre as part of the building. And then secondly, the library in Thornton, which lies just a few yards outside of my own constituency boundary. I cover part of the car park, but not the library itself. And I know my friend, the Right Honourable Member for Wyre Preston North, who is a minister, so can't participate today, nonetheless joins me in the sentiments that I choose to express today. And of course, it isn't just the local MPs who are frustrated by this, it's all our constituents too. And let me just quote from one lady who wrote on my Facebook page earlier this week. Nikki Franklin's her name. She said to me, I home educate my daughter of 5 who has Asperger's syndrome. The library is a vital part of our lives, or should I say her life. It gives us the references we need, along with the means to have a friendly and calm place to go, which we struggle finding elsewhere. Having said that, I have used Thornton Library with all my children since they were a few weeks old. It amazes me the extent of activities available and how important it is to have a library in the community for all ages. I cannot understand why a decision will be made to get rid of such an important service. And that's been very true. I was out in the torrential, providential, pouring rain last Sunday at Thornton Gala, yet there were dozens of people wandering around trying to get signatures to the petition to keep these libraries open. Such is a local passion for retaining these vital services. The Council's rationale is essentially to save money, a point I will touch on later, and that people will still be able to travel to either Fleetwood or Poulton and will retain their library services to utilise them. But there's a hidden irony within this, which is that with the recent wholesale withdrawal of subsidised bus services, for many of my most elderly constituents, getting to Fleetwood or Poulton is now almost an impossibility because there are fewer buses. Many have expressed a frustration to me that they fear they will become prisoners in their own homes. And it isn't just the older residents either. I received a letter from Emily Rogers, Khalees Goffin, Tegan Hood, and Oliver Preston from Northfold Primary School Council, telling me that it has come to our attention that many of our local libraries, including Cleveleys, are under threat of being shut down. We have close links with this library. as many of our pupils take part in the Lancashire Reading Trail. We enjoy it when the librarian Brenda comes into school to talk to us and give out prizes. Many of us enjoy taking part in events and activities at the library during our school holidays, and we would greatly miss this if it was no longer there. Now, over 300 of the school's friends, pupils, parents have signed their petition, desperately asking for this to be kept open. Now, clearly there is a political angle to all of this debate. I have no doubt that on social media right now, someone will be tweeting, it is all my fault because a nasty Conservative government is cutting government budgets somewhere. It will be appearing on Facebook in response to this debate. And it is such a serious accusation, it's worth taking head on. I don't deny that all councils up and down the country face challenges over their budgets. They will choose to meet that challenge in differing ways. Some will do a better job than others at making those spending reductions. But one thing I am quite clear about is that every single council, whichever party happens to be controlling it, needs to be held to account for how it chooses to make those spending reductions. And I don't want to make today's debate about which one party or another party happens to be controlling a particular council. It's about how they choose to make those decisions and the factors that they weigh in the balance, the extent to which they put the needs of the people they represent at the forefront of their minds. Councils need to take responsibility for their decisions. But in Lancashire with the County Council, we've seen some spectacularly bad decisions of late. Mismanaged contracts that have wasted millions of pounds of money. The Conservative group at the County Council discovered an unknown 15 million the County Council never knew it had, which would have been enough with £1 million to spare to allow all the libraries across the county to be saved, but chose not to use it to that end. They wasted 7 million by not going ahead with a new fleet management service, for example. The list could be endless, and it would be odious, I think, to just continue to read them out. But it makes the point to me that Lancashire has not been well managed financially for a number of years under the current people who run that council. But it is the people of Lancashire who are paying the price for those mistakes and that poor governance. And because they haven't done a good job, we all have a price to pay, including my constituents. Now, that political debate, I recognise, does not save a single library, does not change a single mindset in County Hall, because there are political blinkers on, and this becomes a political debate. But what frustrates me is the unwillingness of the County Council to sit down with other borough councils in the county to discuss differing ways to deliver library services. And in Wyre Borough, which covers both Thornton and Cleveleys, they are trying to come up with innovative solutions that would enable the county to save the money that it knows it needs to save, as well as retaining all of Wyre's libraries. And it frustrates me that the County Council won't actually sit down and discuss these ideas. Not least because they're actually ideas that have been implemented by other councils around the country, run by the same party which happens to control the County Council. So it is clearly not a party political issue at all, because other Labour councils are being equally innovative. And I would like to see Lancashire be as innovative. Wyre would like to see all the councils in Wyre become essentially a community interest company. That would release savings that could then be used to maintain all 7 libraries rather than having to shut 3 of them. There will obviously, of course, always be devil in the detail, but surely all sides can sit down and have that discussion, at the very least, whilst the consultation process is underway. In York, which is one of the main models that Wyre is drawing on, and is a Labour-controlled council, they have an industrial and providence society called Explore, which is owned 1/3 by the staff, 2/3 by local people. And local people pay a notional £1 towards their membership, which actually isn't collected by Explore even. But that allows them to have a say in the delivery of their library services and the staff as well. And this is just one example of many up and down the country where councils are trying to take a more creative approach to delivering library services that has not included or has not been dependent upon wholesale closure. I know the Arts Council has a library development fund, and I would be grateful if the Minister could outline what support they might be able to give to both the County Council and Wyreborough, and indeed the Community Task Force, a friend of Thornton Cleveleys Library, who are looking at alternative models of provision. In the same way, what help can the Government's Libraries Task Force give to those who are seeking to develop and change the model of provision in the county? But more fundamentally, can I ask the Minister to reflect on the use to which we can put the 1964 Public Libraries Act? Because my fear is that what Lancashire is planning to do actually places them in breach of the provisions of that Act. I know under the last Labour government, the Right Honourable Member for Lee, who was Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport at the time, chose to refer Wirral Council for a public inquiry because he believed that they were in breach of that Act. They had carried out, or they had rather failed to carry out, a proper assessment of need, and had relied too much on a property-based assessment. Now, I fear Lancashire is treading an identical path, not least in their attempts to focus provision on the most deprived areas. I do not dispute for a second that deprived areas require a greater proportion of public resources, but library services under the 1964 Act are meant to be a universal service. Access to them should not be dependent upon levels of deprivation. That if that is the scheme that the County Council are seeking to adopt to assess who deserves to have a library service in Lancashire, I feel it may be in breach of the 1964 Act. I actually attended the public inquiry in Wirral back in 2009. It was a very interesting two-day experience, and the lady who conducted it, Sue Charteris, did an excellent job at distilling down to the very essentials what the Act required councils to do, how to justify what was a comprehensive service and what that meant in practical terms for the residents of Wirral. And so I urge the Minister to seriously consider whether if Lancashire presses ahead with its current halving of the number of libraries, whether he too will refer Lancashire for a public inquiry to assess whether it is doing the right thing by the 1964 Act. I do not argue that savings should not be made, nor do I think that government should step in and somehow make up the difference to ensure that Lancashire can keep its libraries open. But I do wonder why libraries always seem to be such a soft target for councils of all persuasions to make rapid spending reductions. I would argue that Lancashire in particular has failed in its duties to provide a comprehensive and fair library service for all our residents. The Minister has a chance to influence Lancashire's decision-making during the period of consultation. I urge him to make clear that what they're currently proposing is wholly unacceptable and that they are on the wrong path, that they risk sharing the fate of Wirral, who were forced to go back to the drawing board. In sum, I hope the Minister has heard clearly the views of my constituents as I have expressed them today. They will be replicated not just in my part of Lancashire, but across the county as a whole. I hope he can respond to my specific queries and emphasise for Lancashire that they are on the wrong track here and ask them to think again, please.
Well, I'm very grateful for this opportunity to respond to my honourable friend and also, of course, to appear in front of you, Ms Storries, as the chair of this important debate. You yourself are an extremely distinguished and indeed best-selling author, and I gather your latest novel in the series, the award-winning series that you've produced, The Angels of Lovely Lane, is about to be, or has just been, published. It's certainly available to pre-order on Amazon, and I just wanted to get that on the record. Because obviously libraries are about books, but as my honourable friend pointed out in his very eloquent speech, libraries are about a lot more as well, and I congratulate him on calling this debate and for putting so strongly the case for libraries. And while he was here, obviously, to defend the libraries in his own constituency and local area, a lot of what he said stands for libraries all over England as well. I am the Library Minister responsible for England. It's important to note that it's a devolved matter as far as Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland are concerned. I'm lucky enough to have been the Libraries Minister for some 6 years, and indeed to be the shadow spokesman for the 4 years before that. So I'm pretty familiar with most of the issues, and indeed I remember the Wirral inquiry well. Indeed, it was me that called on the Secretary of State to call that inquiry, and I asked him to call it because I agree with my honourable friend that at the time there had been no proper investigation of the library service. The Wirral Council had effectively taken a survey of their buildings and decided which ones they should close, but they hadn't actually taken a survey of their library service and how it could be most effectively delivered. But of course, it's perfectly appropriate for councils to look hard at their library service, as it's perfectly appropriate for them in difficult economic circumstances to look hard at all the services they deliver to see whether they could be delivered more efficiently. And in fact, across the country, there are many examples of library services that are being innovative. For example, in Suffolk, their library service has now become an industry and provident trust. Its libraries are remaining open. They're more innovative. The opening hours are longer and they are more popular. The recently retired Cara Eastle, the head of the library service in Devon, who's just done a fantastic job, recently retired as the head of the Society of Chief Librarians, I should say, who's done a fantastic job in that post, has recently presided over the move from Devon into a Devon Libraries into a mutual organisation. So libraries do have a bright future. And I have to say as well, I will always use this opportunity to talk about the success of the library service, because too often, as my honourable friend points out, libraries seem to be at the back of the queue for many local authorities, but also, paradoxically, many of the people who claim to have libraries at their hearts and to see them as important spend their entire time doing down the library service and claiming that it is on the point of collapse and in crisis. And indeed, when I asked the then Secretary of State to call his inquiry into the Wirral Library Service, I did make the point then, and I've made the point ever since, that at no point as the opposition spokesman did I ever accuse the library service as a whole of being in crisis. I was quite happy to call out particularly egregious examples of local authority behaviour, but I didn't believe then, and I don't believe now, that the library service is in crisis. It is having to modernise. We do take library closures as an indication of the health of the library service, and I backed figures between myself, library campaigners, and indeed, I'm afraid, Ms. Dorries, the BBC, who haven't been as accurate as they could be in terms of the number of library closures. It is always difficult to actually have an accurate figure, which might sound surprising. Most people would look at a library and say, I know what a library looks like, but actually the definition of a library can be something that people have different interpretations of. But as far as we're aware in the department, just over 100 libraries have closed their doors, and something like 200 libraries are now open but managed by the local community and volunteers. But there are still 3,000 libraries in England that can count as part of the statutory service, spending some £700 million a year in order to provide the great service they do to my constituents, my honourable friend's constituents and others. But my honourable friend was quite right to point out his concerns about what is happening in Lancashire. And as he also pointed out in mentioning the £15 million that Lancashire had discovered, it is possible, councils are not all seeing and all dancing, and it's possible for them to make different decisions. But it is also important to remind ourselves that libraries are funded by councils and they are run by councils. Central government has never run the library service, it's never funded the library service. It does have the backstop of the statutory duty. But I just want to briefly look at what is happening in Lancashire. It has seen, I'm afraid, a decline in the number of visits. Visits have fallen by, I gather, a fifth, and active book borrowers by around a quarter. And I also understand that the two libraries in my honourable member's constituency have experienced a significant decline over the same period, visits by about a third and active borrowers by just over a quarter. I do know that the Council has undertaken 2 consultations this year on the future of the library service. The first was undertaken in January. The Council consulted on possible budget savings for the next 5 years, and one of the proposed options included a rather dramatic proposal to reduce the number of libraries from 74 to 34, those that were, the 40 that were due to be come out of the council service would either be closed or run by local communities. Just as an indication of how popular and important libraries are to the local community, that consultation drew more than 10,000 responses. The council then considered considered the responses to the consultation, and they undertook a further 12-week consultation, and that consultation is currently underway, Mr. Dorries. It's now due, as I understand it, to end in mid-August, if I'm correct. The proposals have changed slightly, so instead of only 34 libraries, the council is now proposing 44 libraries, 37 fully staffed and resourced libraries, an additional 7 libraries which wouldn't be staffed, but they would have all the facilities of a council library, including self-service counters and the opportunity to reserve and return books, and also 6 mobile library vehicles, a home library service, and the virtual library service. The council is aware of this interest from the community in taking responsibility for buildings or taking over the running of the service, the parts of which the county council won't maintain, and they've invited expression of interest. I also understand that no final decision will be made on any of the proposals until the council's cabinet has had the opportunity to fully consider and evaluate all the information gathered. Of course.
What is therefore to me vitally important that Lancashire actually talks to borough councils such as Wyre about their plans for the libraries, if it is, as it says, open to new ideas.
Yes.
I would certainly agree with my honourable friend on that. If the council is not engaging, if the county council is not engaging properly with borough councils, I would find that extremely surprising, and that would cause me some significant concern. It's very, very important that county councils get out of their silos and talk to the local borough councils, and indeed one of my hobby horses is that councils should talk to their neighbouring councils. So the county council should talk to other councils outside of Lancashire as well, because there's a way that councils can keep libraries open while reducing, as it were, the back office costs, the administrative costs of libraries by sharing services. In fact, in West London, Westminster, Kensington and Chelsea and Hammersmith and Fulham effectively merged the administration of their library service. And not only did that save them £1 million a year in administration costs, it actually enabled them to open a library. And I should say at this point as well, the Conservative Authority in Windsor, for example, is also opening libraries because it runs its service so efficiently. So it is possible to open libraries even in a difficult economic climate. But I'm sure my honourable friend understands that it's difficult for me to intervene at this stage while the consultation is still going on. And there is some debate over my capacity to intervene, or rather my willingness to intervene, I should say. In actual fact, Mr. Dorries, this is the first administration which has routinely looked at every single proposal from every council to close libraries. My officials investigate every proposal before them and test it against the 1964 Act, which my honourable friend mentioned, and the duty to provide a comprehensive and efficient library service before deciding whether to intervene. But again, it may sound paradoxical, but sometimes councils may decide to close a library in order to run a more efficient service. The first case I had as a libraries minister was Brent. On a political level, that was an absolutely open goal. It was a Labour council proposing to close 6 out of its 12 libraries. But when it was looked at in some detail by my officials, it was quite clear that the council really should have been thinking about the future of its libraries some 5 years ago, some 10 years ago, but obviously the political hot potato that is a library prevented them making decisions which actually may end up meaning that they run a better, more efficient library service, able to provide better services to more people with more opening hours. And those are the kind of decisions we have to weigh up, and we have to respect as well the role that local councils play in running a local service. But that does not mean, of course, that my honourable friend is not perfectly entitled, quite rightly so, to put the alternative case and to put it as forcefully as he has done in this place today. I want to say just a few words in the minutes that I've left to me about the national picture, because I've made it clear that while ministers don't run libraries, and we don't fund libraries from a central government fund, we do have this backstop of the statutory library service, but we've also gone a lot further than that. Very early on, after the 2010 election, we moved responsibility for libraries to the Arts Council, to a bigger organisation, joining up libraries with cultural provision, which is long overdue. And the Arts Council had a £6 million fund to support culture in libraries, which has been very effective. But after the 2015, or just before the 2015 election, we set up the Leadership for Libraries Task Force. Now, what that does is, at a national level, it brings together key stakeholders. It brings together, for example, the Local Government Association, the Society of Chief Librarians, and my department. And they work very hard to spread libraries' best practice. My honourable friend mentioned what help could Lancashire Library Service get, should it choose, from central government. Well, one thing it could do is engage with the Leadership for Libraries Task Force. We've consulted on a draft vision called Libraries Deliver, and we intend to publish the final document quite shortly, but that will contain examples of best practice of what innovation different library authorities can bring to bear in order to provide a more effective library service. But we've also been more practical still. For example, we spent some £2 or £3 million ensuring that every library in England had Wi-Fi. It may surprise honourable members to know, in a digital age, if you're looking for reasons to visit a library, surely the opportunity to access Wi-Fi and therefore do your homework or do some research on your tablet is there. But more than 1,000 libraries in England didn't have Wi-Fi. Now, thanks to us, they do. We've published 2 best practice toolkits on libraries. We've brought coordination and focus to promote National Libraries Day, the one day in the year in February when we can talk about how important libraries are. We've invested in the Enterprising Libraries programme with the British Library, which allows key city libraries to work as hubs for entrepreneurs, again, updating the value that libraries bring to their communities. So on every level, we have tried to promote innovation in libraries. And the Society of Chief Librarians, for example, has promoted the value of books and reading, not just in and of itself and for literature, but of course for health and well-being as well, and a variety of other aspects as well. And in an age when the Summer Reading Challenge, for example, now reaches more and more children than ever before, we do see the library service evolving. So I, for one, think the library service has an exciting future. I hear my honourable friend's perfectly legitimate and well-put concerns about the future of Lancashire libraries. I would join him in urging Lancashire County Council during this consultation to think imaginatively, to look at new models of delivery that have been implemented elsewhere, to listen carefully to what my honourable friend has said about the more efficient use of existing resources, to understand the passion and enthusiasm that local people feel for their library service, to engage with the Leadership for Libraries Task Force about what opportunities there may be to learn from best practice elsewhere. And as with every proposal to close libraries, we will keep it under review, and if appropriate, we will act.
Mr. Mayor, would you like to come back quickly with any further comments? Okay, the question is that this House has considered library services in Thornton Cleveleys. As Mayor, that opinion say aye. Aye. On to the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order.